Okay, so you want to own a satellite network, put a few thousand machines in orbit, beam internet down to every corner of the planet, and collect a subscription from every human being who lives somewhere a cable can't reach. Infinite market, no competitors, no roads to dig up, just physics and a monthly bill. But here's the strange part. Before Starlink, the number of low-orbit satellite constellations that avoided bankruptcy was 0. Not a low number, 0. Iridium, Globalstar, Orbcomm, Teledesic, LeoSat, OneWeb. Every single company that tried to ring the Earth in satellites either went bankrupt, ran out of money mid-deployment, or simply died before the first satellite ever flew. And the way they died is almost funny. Iridium spent roughly $6 billion building a constellation of 66 satellites. It worked. The engineering was a triumph. The satellites went up, the network switched on, the phones connected. 9 months later, the company was in Chapter 11. The entire $6 billion constellation, still in orbit, still fully operational, was sold to a group of investors for $35 million, half a cent on the dollar. They were days away from deliberately deorbiting the whole thing, burning $6 billion of working hardware into the atmosphere on purpose, because it was cheaper than keeping it. So how does the exact same business now generate over $11 billion a year and $4.5 billion in operating profit? What changed? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what changed. And it isn't the satellites. You'll know what it really costs to put a network in orbit. Why the thing you're actually buying is not hardware at all. It's a piece of paper. And why this business has a death zone built into its physics, a period where you have spent everything and cannot earn a single dollar. And why that death zone is what killed every single company that came before. Let's start with what it costs to get in. At the small end, this is more accessible than you'd think. A single small satellite, a CubeSat, or a small imaging satellite can be built for a few $100,000 to a few $1 million. And you can buy a ride to orbit on a rideshare launch. Plenty of small companies do this. Earth imaging, weather data, asset tracking, ship monitoring. This is a real business, and it's the only version of this business a normal person could ever attempt. In the middle sits the traditional model. The big geostationary satellite, one enormous machine parked 22,000 miles up, sitting motionless above one spot on Earth. These run anywhere from $150 million to $400 million, all in satellite plus launch plus insurance. And for decades, this was the entire industry. One satellite, one slot, one region, one revenue stream. And then there's the modern version, the mega constellation. And the numbers here stop making sense. When SpaceX first estimated the cost of designing, building, and deploying Starlink, the figure was at least $10 billion. Amazon has put more than $10 billion into Project Kuiper, and at time of writing, has yet to earn meaningful revenue from it. Starlink now has somewhere north of 10,000 satellites in orbit, 10,000 machines. Each one has to be manufactured, launched, tracked, maneuvered, and eventually replaced. So that's the entry fee, $10 billion minimum before your first customer. But the entry fee is not what kills you. There are two costs nobody warns you about, and both of them are permanent. The first is the replacement treadmill. And it is the single most misunderstood thing about this industry. A satellite in low Earth orbit is not a building. It's a candle. At those altitudes, there's still a whisper of atmosphere, enough drag that the satellite is constantly, slowly falling. It burns fuel to stay up. And a Starlink satellite has an expected working life of roughly 5 years. 5 years. Think about what that means. You did not build infrastructure. You built something that dissolves. Every satellite you launch today is a satellite you must replace before the end of the decade. At 10,000 satellites on a 5-year life, you are signing up to manufacture and launch roughly 2,000 replacement satellites every single year forever, just to stay exactly where you are. Not to grow, to not shrink. There is no version of this business where you finish building it. You build it every year until you die. The second hidden cost isn't a cost at all. It's a countdown clock, and it is the reason this business is genuinely unlike any other, because you cannot just launch satellites. You need spectrum. The specific radio frequencies your network transmits on, and you need orbital slots. the actual physical shells of space your satellites occupy. And here's the thing that should reframe this entire video for you. That spectrum is allocated internationally on a first-come, first-served basis. Read that again. The most valuable real estate in the modern economy, the invisible frequencies that carry global connectivity. And the rule is, whoever files first and actually deploys gets it. There's a finite amount of usable spectrum and a finite number of good orbital shells, and once they're taken, they're taken. This is not a market where you can out-innovate your way in later. It's a land grab, and the land is finite, which is why the regulators attached a gun to your head. These licenses come with use it or lose it deadlines. Amazon's Kuiper is required to have a large fraction of its constellation, well over 1,000 satellites actually in orbit by a hard deadline, or it forfeits its license rights, not gets a warning, forfeits. $10 billion of investment, contingent on hitting a launch schedule set by a regulator, and this is why China filed for constellations, totaling numbers in the hundreds of thousands of satellites. Nobody seriously believes they will launch 200,000 satellites. That's not a deployment plan. That's a claim stake. It's a company running to the courthouse to file on land it has no intention of farming, purely so nobody else can have it. So now you understand what you're really buying. You're not buying satellites. Satellites are the receipt. You're buying a permanent, defensible, government-granted claim on a finite slice of the sky and the frequencies that pass through it. The hardware is just the proof that you showed up. Now, how does this thing actually make money? Here's the number that unlocks it. Once the satellites are up there and the network capacity exists, the marginal cost of serving one more customer is essentially zero. The satellite is flying over that house whether or not anyone in it is a subscriber. The bandwidth exists whether or not anyone uses it. Every new subscriber is very close to pure profit. That's the whole business. The entire model is spend an unthinkable amount of money upfront to build a global machine with almost no variable cost, and then spend the rest of your life adding customers to it for free? Look at what that produces at scale. Starlink now serves well over 10 million subscribers across 160 countries at an average revenue of roughly $65 a month in its most recent full year. That meant around $11.4 billion in revenue and roughly $4.4 billion in operating income. It has become the largest and most profitable part of SpaceX, a rocket company, by a wide margin. But here's the part that breaks people's brains. The consumer subscriber is not where the real margin lives. The consumer pays $65 a month and needs a subsidized dish. The airline paying for in-flight connectivity across its entire fleet does not. The shipping company connecting hundreds of vessels does not. The enterprise customer running remote operations does not. And above all, the government does not. Maritime, aviation, enterprise, and defense are the high-value seams of this business. And they are pure margin because they ride on infrastructure you already built for the consumer. A military contract does not require you to launch a single additional satellite. It's revenue with no corresponding capital cost. This is why Starlink's government-focused business has been growing at enormous rates, and why the defense contracts attached to this industry are measured in billions. So the reframe is this. You're not running an internet service provider. You are running a global bandwidth monopoly with near zero marginal cost, and the consumer subscribers exist mostly to justify the build-out of the asset you actually monetize, which is a strategic communications network that governments and industries cannot function without. Which brings us to the secret, the one that answers the question I asked at the start. Why did Iridium die and Starlink live? It wasn't better satellites, it was the rocket. Look at the cost structure. For a satellite operator, launch is the single largest capital expense in the entire business. Every other constellation in history had to buy that launch from somebody else at market prices, which meant their biggest cost line was set by a supplier who could raise the price whenever they wanted. And their competitors' economics were tied to the same supplier. SpaceX owns the rocket. It doesn't buy launches, it charges itself. A reusable booster that has flown dozens of times drops the deployment cost of the constellation to a level nobody else on Earth can match. Competitors buying satellites at $10 to $40 million each and paying market rate for third-party launches are not playing the same game. Some of them, remarkably, end up buying their launches from SpaceX. They pay their competitor for the privilege of competing with it. That's the moat. The satellite network is not a satellite business. It's a launch business wearing a satellite business as a costume. And if you do not own the rocket, you are building a company whose survival depends on the pricing decisions of the company you're trying to beat. Now let's talk about what will kill you. Because there are 3 ways to die here. And the first one has killed nearly everybody. It's the death zone. And it's built into the physics. A constellation does not work partially. Iridium needed 66 satellites in specific planes before the phones could work as promised. OneWeb needed hundreds for continuous global coverage. You cannot launch 10% of a constellation and earn 10% of the revenue. You earn nothing. Zero. You must spend billions over years with the full weight of a manufacturing line and a launch campaign and receive nothing at all. Until you cross a threshold, at which point the service suddenly works everywhere at once. So there is a period, years long, where you have spent billions. You have zero revenue. And you must keep spending or the whole thing is worthless. That's the valley. And every constellation that died in it. OneWeb managed 74 satellites out of hundreds before its funding fell through. It didn't fail because the technology didn't work. It failed because it ran out of runway before the machine could switch on. The second way to die is demand. Iridium's engineering was flawless. The problem was that the phone cost $3,000. Calls ran $3 to $8 a minute, and it barely worked indoors or in a car. They built a technological miracle for a customer who, it turned out, did not exist in the numbers the spreadsheet needed. And in this business, being wrong about demand is fatal, because you cannot scale down. The constellation costs what it costs, whether 1 million people subscribe or 10. And the third way to die is the one nobody has fully priced in yet. The sky is getting crowded. Satellites fail. Even a healthy constellation produces derelicts, dead machines that can no longer maneuver every single year. There is no enforceable global traffic system up there. And if enough hardware accumulates in the same shells, collisions produce debris, and debris produces more collisions. The shared asset that everyone in this industry depends on, empty, usable orbit, is being consumed by all of them at once, and nobody owns the responsibility for cleaning it. If that ever tips, it doesn't bankrupt one company, it closes the business. So, the real numbers, scenario 1, you're not SpaceX. You build a focused small constellation, a few dozen satellites doing Earth imaging, ship tracking, or weather data, capital in the tens of millions to low hundreds of millions. You sell data, not connectivity, to insurers, governments, farmers, and hedge funds. It's a real, defensible, unglamorous business. And it can be genuinely profitable because you never have to cross the death zone. You're selling a product from day one. Scenario 2, you go for the sky itself. $10 billion, minimum years of zero revenue. A regulatory clock counting down. A permanent obligation to rebuild 2,000 satellites a year forever. And on the other side of that, if you survive it, you get something almost no business in history has ever had. Over 10 million subscribers who have no real alternative, a marginal cost near zero, $4.5 billion a year in operating profit, and a legally protected claim on a piece of the sky that nobody can ever take back. Which is why the entry price of this business is not measured in money. Every company on that list had money. It's measured in whether you can survive the years where the money only goes one direction. Because up there, the physics doesn't care how good your idea was. The constellation either closes or it doesn't. And every single company that got it wrong left their hardware in orbit, still flying, still working, still perfectly useless, circling a planet full of people who never signed up.